that you have this webinar, which is organized jointly by ICCSL, LNW, Daily FT, and several others. And I believe it's a very useful topic that you are looking at. Normally, the budget focuses on the tax provisions as well as perhaps the fiscal measures adopted by the government. And there is a discussion that goes on that. But this one you have aptly titled Projections, Possibilities, Policies, and Opportunities. I think that's an important aspect of the budget that all of you are looking at. And that's a refreshing change from the normal attention that is given to the budget. Now, I'm speaking to you today from Jaffna, where I've been going around in the morning, visiting several locations of various projects. And I have been particularly pleased that so many of these projects are homegrown and areas which we haven't been generally thinking of as being possible for Sri Lanka to do. And that has been a revelation to me as well. Now, several of these projects have been supported with loans from the Saubhagya loan scheme of the central bank. And that was one of the reasons why there was this special attention from our side to go and look at it. And we looked at herbal teas. We looked at cashew production as well as finishing. We looked at paper. We looked at metal industry. All these were very refreshing because they were mainly looking at either import substitution or looking at export itself. Now, in the case of one, which was the herbal teas, I was pleased to note that it was being promoted by an ex-cadre of a militant group, and she was in fact employing about 15 others, and they were using absolutely homegrown items to transform normal tea into the fairly exotic type of herbal teas, and those herbal teas were being exported directly by them. So the direct producer was exporting it through eBay as well as through other systems, and then getting payment from worldwide payment systems. And the packaging was done by them, the designing was done by them. So it was an awesome experience to understand that this was happening. Now, this is what is possible in today's context. These are the opportunities that are available to so many people. So this budget, I think, opens the doors for people who are involved and interested in doing certain businesses to venture out to the world. And that is one of the areas in which we should also concentrate on. We do concentrate on the big items, and I think there's nothing wrong with that. But at the same time, we need to ensure that we have a system in our country that would support all these different types of businesses which are spawning all over the country and which can perhaps provide a massive export drive to our country as it goes on. So our job would be to ensure that we give the support, the infrastructure, the ability to have payment gateways, the ability to have access, and that, I think, is one of the ways in which we can now create some new projections for our country. Now, where are we today? I think after the pandemic, we have recovered to a great extent now. We are seeing a 5% growth, albeit on a very low negative growth of 3.5% in 2020. 2021 will provide us with a reasonable platform to move forward. And in that platform, we are looking at striving for growth of at least 6% in the year 2022. That's a vital year for us. If we are able to realize those projections and to move forward, Sri Lanka will be well on its path for a much needed macroeconomic growth, which we desperately need right now. So to get growth, we got to have investment. To have investment, we need to be able to provide a good platform for people to believe that they can use that platform and move Sri Lanka forward. So that is based on certain disciplines being brought into our economy. We have to make sure that our debt is under control, make sure that our fiscal deficit is under control. We got to make sure that even in the midst of acute problems of the world, where we see commodity prices rising to well beyond normal norms, that we are able to bring in certain discipline to our country as well. And that would be vital in the next year when going forward. So in that year, we have to make sure that our external account is carefully managed. That is going to be a challenge for us. And we are doing whatever that is needed to be done in order to maintain that situation. We have to make sure that our rupee is of reasonable value so that it can promote the exports as well as imports, debt servicing, debt receiving, the remittances that need to come into the country. So all these are the challenges where we have to grapple with. And at the same time, we have to ensure that the growth is maintained. Now, to maintain as well as spur growth, the government has reflected on several areas which can be the ones that can promote that growth. The aviation hub, the naval hub, going back to the knowledge intensified subjects of growth, the commercial activities, as well as the promotion of education, health services, industrial zones, the port city. These are all massive opportunities that we have right now. We can connect to the world. We have the infrastructure to do that. We have got good infrastructure going in the country. We have invested heavily in the road network, where we are to this year, we are going to have a plan which will take us forward to having 100,000 kilometers of road, which is reconstructed or renovated or newly built, so that Sri Lanka can be totally interconnected. We are providing the support to the people of our country so that they can have water. Sometimes we don't recognize these as important facets, but we got to understand that the trickle of the growth must also go down to the people of our country. I remember in 2006, the president at that time, President Mahinda Rajapakse, worked on providing electricity to all. And when we had a country of just 72% coverage of electricity, moving towards the 100% and finally achieving nearly 99% was a very important feature of the development of our country. At the same time, this challenge for our government is to ensure that the growth, that the provision of water increases from about 42 to 43%, which is the value now of the people who are having pipe-borne water, for it to be increased to at least 85%. Now, these need investment, these need careful monitoring as well as implementation, and those are also going to be done. And at the same time, providing the support to improving the doing business indicators is a very, very important part of Sri Lanka's development. We know that the port city is to be developed with a single window concept, so that with that single window, the people who are doing business will have access to the support as well as the government authorities who are working with them. And beyond that, we need to ensure that across all sections, that Sri Lanka would have a good doing business indicators going forward. And at the same time, the investment climate will be important for us to generate confidence. And in generating confidence, there will be certain areas that we need to tackle, particularly in the external account, which now needs to be carefully nurtured. And we are doing that. We are also changing the stance of the country's external inflows without relying on the traditional methods of only having external debt, which is particularly of a commercial nature. We're now moving into a new situation where there are where is the monetization of underutilized assets, where we'll have swaps between central banks to central banks, governmental loans, which are essentially long-term, so that it doesn't impact the normal markets. These are all important shifts that the government has now embarked upon and are vigorously pursuing in order to ensure that we will be in a position to ensure that Sri Lanka could look at the future with a lot more confidence. To do that, we have to have some innovations as well. Some areas will be new thoughts, new schemes, new areas of development, and that sometimes can also bring in together with that certain criticisms. But we got to be able to meet those criticisms, make changes as and when those are being shown up, and that's something that we need to do. We did have some new areas of conversion of the foreign exchange that exporters have. We did have several discussions, and the latest the discussion that we had, it shows that most of them are now very supportive of that venture and supportive of that plan, and we have had direct confirmations of that as well. And in addition, there are certain areas that have been pointed out, which we as regulators, as well as people who are working as catalysts of the economy, are willing to look at and change. With so that really pays dividends as well. So I'm glad that we have the opportunity of airing these views, talking to people, and having a constant dialogue which is very important. Although I may need to leave now because of a fairly tight schedule out here in Jaffna that I am now at, I will look at these that you are going to make at this webinar and take note of those. And we are happy that so many people gather together to air their views as well as have a constant dialogue. And we look forward to that in the future as well. So I want to thank the ICCSL as well as all the other institutions that have got together to provide this space as well as provide this platform for these airing of views. And I look forward to hearing from you even more in the future as we unfold these plans in implementation. So thank you, and I wish you all a very productive session today.
I do believe that Mr. Dinesh Veerakoti has a few questions that he will direct to the first of our keynote speakers, the Governor.
Okay. Thank you, Arun. Thank you, Governor, for joining us. You're very supportive of ICSA. So thank you very much. I have 3 or 4 very hard questions. I know you're very good at answering these. So my first question is, the general view is that we will run out of dollars in Q1 2022. What are your specific proposals to address this issue?
Thank you, Dinesh. I think these have been termed as hard questions. I actually like those questions. When you say that we will run out of dollars in 2022, I believe the same question was asked in 2020 as well. I was told that we run out of dollars in 2020, and then they shifted it to 2021, and now it has been shifted to 2022. And I must tell you that in the next year, it will probably get shifted to 2023. Now, the real crux of this matter is to have a cash flow that would generate a platform which does not run out of dollars. And that's an important criteria. We did have a challenge, I must admit, with tourism not being around and tourism receipts not being available. And there was a challenge for us to meet with this situation of sufficient dollars. And there have been a few anxious moments as well. But we have, from the time I have been the governor, we have taken steps to meet with that challenge. And new avenues have been unfolded, which has made it possible for us to have sufficient dollars to go forward. And each step of the way, we have given a very clear roadmap, a 6-month roadmap. I think that's out there for everyone to see. And I believe that tells you very clearly as to how we are going to do it. And I can also tell you, Dinesh, we will be pursuing that very closely. There are a few areas which are almost at the verge of being announced. And once those are announced, I'm sure you would find that it is quite it will be quite a revelation, because lots of people who had been thinking that we will run out of dollars will be convinced thereafter that it's not the case.
So, Governor, first quarter 22, you believe that we won't have a big depreciation of the rupee?
No, we won't have a depreciation of the rupee. We are confident that the rupee will maintain its value. It will probably even have a opportunity of being a little more at an appreciated value. As you know, the real effective exchange rate of the rupee is today quite depreciated already. Our calculations are that it should be close to 170, and instead of being at around 200. So therefore, we have given indication in our roadmap as well that in the period up to 31st of December, that we wouldn't want it to depreciate or appreciate, and we want to maintain value. But thereafter, in the year 2022, we will take a call as to which way the rupee should move, and whichever way it moves, and I think it will probably be to the appreciation mode, we would do it very, very gently so that all stakeholders could adjust to that as time goes on.
Okay. On that optimistic note, I'll move to my next question. Does the CBSL have a specific strategy to prioritize the opening of LCs, where some companies are complaining that non-essential products are being imported with the limited dollars we have?
That's a criticism that we have encountered on and off, Dinesh, and I think it's a valid criticism, because different people perceive essential or non-essential from their own point of view. What is sometimes essential for you may be termed as non-essential for me, or vice versa. So therefore, this debate will continue all the time, because there are instances where certain items which are critical for some may be totally unnecessary for the others. So that's why we have to grapple with this debate the same way that we grapple with the value of the rupee, because different people have different ideas and they think each one has their own viewpoint on that, and we need to grapple with it. Finally, my main answer would be that we need to ensure that there is sufficient dollars so that the priority business doesn't really come in. Because if you have sufficient for all, for essential as well as non-essential, as people may see it, then this question of whether it is essential or non-essential won't arise, and we won't have to debate that any further.
Okay. On the tourism sector moratoriums, a lot of companies are hoping that there will be some solution to this without just extending it. Your thoughts around that?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. My own view is that the moratoriums will have to stop at some time or the other. We have already given moratoriums to the value of about 4,100 billion rupees for different periods of time, no doubt. But at the same time, that's a very large quantum of moratoria that we have had to provide, so that there would be stability in the entire financial system. Tourism has been very badly affected, we all know, and tourism needs some special support as well. But the tourism plant, by and large, is quite well maintained. And although there have been a few instances of tourism plant being damaged to some extent, but by and large, the massive tourism plant, which is of a value of about 1 trillion rupees, is yet intact and is able to generate a fairly good income for the country, provided we have tourists coming in. So the important facet of this whole exercise is to ensure that as many tourists can come into this country by ensuring that there is the good vaccination program, and that has been already achieved. And I believe that as we go on, the necessity for the moratorium would perhaps ease, and those who really need something could be then supported on a case-by-case basis.
Okay. My final three questions are very quick ones. Will the banks be allowed to pay dividends next year?
Yes, we want to bring back normalcy as fast as possible. And there have been a few challenges that has arisen as a result of the acute shortage of dollars coming in from the tourism sector. But I believe as things ease, we would like to get back to normalcy, just like the country is getting back to normalcy. And then we would probably be able to have seminars organized by you also in a physical form. And then we can all get back to normalcy as fast as possible.
The ballooning of the trade deficit, is it worrying you?
Yes, if there is a trade deficit which is expanding, that's certainly worrisome. But at the same time, in Sri Lanka, one of the important considerations is that although the trade deficit seems to be widening in certain months, we have seen the inflows coming in from other non-merchandise sector has been quite strong as well. The BPOs, the other inflows coming in from the transport sector, the port sector, the IT sector, those have been quite strong, and that has compensated to a great extent. What has been also worrying has been that there has been a short period of time during which the remittances have also been dwindling, and we have already identified those reasons, and we are now dealing with those reasons very, very quickly. As you know, a special department has been created in the central bank for foreign remittances facilitation department, and we're using that to now concentrate on the areas where we are somewhat weak to ensure that we can continue supporting those areas of remittances so that we can ensure that shortage that has occurred will be a thing of the past, and we can get back to a robust remittances as well. So if we have that, I believe we'll be quite able to deal with the ballooning trade deficit, and that's also one of the ways in which we would be dealing with it.
Okay, I know this is not your favorite question, but is the government still saying no to the IMF?
Yes, we are saying no very firmly because, as you know, IMF is not an option that we should explore at the moment because we are well on the way to recovery. And I cannot understand why people would want to put pain on themselves and cause pain to creditors and then still go through a process of that nature. We have been able to ensure that there has been sufficient dollars, and we would make sure that that would take place. And we are very clearly able to manage the situation without putting a huge amount of pain on our economy as well as our creditors. As you know, if there is going to be a restructuring, then there could be sometimes under the IMF program, quite a lot of pain being caused. But after all, what is restructuring? If you get a new loan, Dinesh, and then you are able to settle your old loan at a price which is favorable, or extend the period of your loan, that's also a kind of a restructuring that people have. So what are we doing? We are making sure that the loans that we are settling, where the money is coming from different aspects of an inflow, where we are getting government to government and then settling the commercial loan. Sometimes we may have it at a lower price. Sometimes we may be having a non-debt creating inflow through the sale of a underutilized asset. So that would mean that we are now changing the course of our economy, where we are not creating more and more debt, and that is exactly what is needed to deal with the situation. Now, if you are dealing with that situation and dealing with it successfully, and we would have a much more sustainable way of going forward, then we don't really need to go and access another source, which a few people believe is going to be a popular or fashionable source. I must tell you, Dinesh, as you know very well, we have gone to the IMF at different times. And I myself was the governor at that time in 2008 when we reached out to them, and we had a very successful program. We had $2.6 billion which we borrowed to the central bank and we repaid. So it's not that we are averse to it because of some unknown reason. We do have a practical way of looking at these, and we are confident about the measures that we are putting in place. We have expanded that in our roadmap very clearly, and we are pursuing that with a dedication as well as a commitment. And we are confident that that would provide the results that is required. And therefore, I'm sorry I had to give you a somewhat longer answer that I normally would have given, but I think we need to put this to rest and not confuse the public, not confuse the creditors, not confuse other stakeholders. The government has taken a firm stand. We are supportive of that stand from the central bank's point of view. We are confident of ensuring that our plan would work well and that we would be able to deal with this quickly as well as in a sustainable manner. And that's why we are not going to the IMF right now.
Okay, thank you. Finally, your thoughts on the CSC.
On the
Colombo Stock Exchange?
Yes. I think the Colombo Stock Exchange has seen a wide rise, but I'm still thinking that it has still not reached the market capitalization that was around in 2014. In 2014, Dinesh, as you know very well, we had a market capitalization of about $25 billion within the stock exchange. Today, it may be in the range of about 22 billion. It was earlier 25 billion. Now it is about 22 billion. So still, the value after 7 years hasn't still reached in dollar terms the value that it had in 2014. So I believe there is space. There is space for investors to come in and take positions. And I think that mature investors who would look at the stock exchange in totality would see opportunities which can be then very useful. Your seminar is called Projections, Possibilities and Policies. I think the policies are in place for those projections to occur. And I believe the stock exchange has tremendous potential and the possibilities are available to those investors who would like to take up positions. And I think it's necessary for them to project these values and then see for themselves as to how they could benefit by the Colombo Stock Exchange. I would like to see more foreign investors now coming in because they would see that the local investors have a great deal of confidence in the stock exchange, and that's a very good message that could be sent to the rest of the world.
Thank you, Governor. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much.
Over to you, Arun.
Thank you to all of you for giving me this opportunity. I'm sorry I have to leave you now to attend other areas of work that I have made commitments for, and I wish all of you all success. Thank you, Dinesh, and thank you all.
Thank you.
And thank you too, the Governor of the Central Bank. We appreciate that in the midst of all the traveling that needs to be done, you've given us some time. Thank you. And now we have with us the former Senior Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka,
Recording
Mr. W.
stopped.
Wijewardena, who is certainly no stranger to this community assembled here. And perhaps there are some comments that were made earlier by the Governor, Mr. Cabraal, that could also be the platform for some remarks from Mr. Wijewardena. So over to Mr. W.A. Wijewardena.
So thank you very much, Arun. Thanks the ICC for inviting me to share my thoughts on that. I am glad that I am speaking after Governor Cabraal has spoken on the budget 2022. I'll be taking a little contrary view to what he has presented here. Governor Cabraal has been a very vocal supporter of the budget. Naturally, he should be, because he is part of the team that had prepared this budget. And but of course, there is a missing link in the presentation that he made, where he had made a partial reference to what I am going to talk about now. That missing link is the one that I am going to draw your attention. And a hint about the missing link was given by Minister Basil Rajapakse when he presented the tax amnesty bill and the Securities and Exchange Commission bill in Parliament a month ago, drawing from a poem from a leading textbook on Buddhism. He has said, Sri Lankans are a nation where a man who is facing 3 types of death is now licking a honeycomb. Marana tulak, atiminihe panic. So during the time he made this remark, the 3 types of debts were, one was the depleting foreign reserves, second one was the mounting foreign debt problem in Sri Lanka, third one was the pressure for exchange rate to depreciate. Now, after 1 month of his, using this parable, I can see that there are many more debts that have been added to the list of the debts that we are faced with. The fourth one is the inability for Sri Lanka to import essential medicines, essential fuel, and essential foods because of the shortage of foreign exchange in the market. The fifth one is that we are facing a severe food crisis because of the low food production. The sixth one is the most important one. The government of Sri Lanka is moving towards bankruptcy. The government will become bankrupt when it is unable to raise revenue through normal tax channels and when it has to depend on the money printing for the purpose of financing its expenditure. The government of Sri Lanka presently, because of the attractive tax concessions that was given by the present government when it came to power in November 2019, it had lost a revenue base of about, say, 500 billion every year. So as a result, the government's tax revenue had fallen short of the government's expenditure program, and it has to borrow money. But because of the inability of the government to raise money from outside sources, government has to borrow from the local sources. But within the local sources, because of the low interest rate regime which had been maintained in the past, the savings has dwindled. As a result, the government is unable to borrow from the market, and the option available for the government is to print money. In fact, this was heavily used by the government during the first 20-month time period, starting from January 2020, ending in September 2021. The total money stock of the country had increased by 2.9 trillion or 38% during this particular period, which is a substantial sum. So when a government has to print money and not raise revenue through the normal channels, the government is reaching the bankruptcy level. So that is the sixth type of debt that we are facing. So in fact, this is a very serious situation. And government, I hope that I expected Minister Basil Rajapakse to change this tax regime in his budget, but instead what he did was he had gone for some temporary taxes in order to raise revenue for only for year 2022. But we don't know what would happen to the government of Sri Lanka after 2022, because in 2023, if we don't get the same tax revenue, the government will become bankrupt during that year. So this is a very important thing. So the present state of the economy is a sick economy. And the sick economy, you'll be noticing the 6 types of debts that we are facing today, except the government bankruptcy. All the 5 are related to the non-availability of foreign exchange in the market. Now, Governor Cabraal was very confident that he has enough foreign exchange, but actually what we receive from the market, the information that we receive from the market actually contradicts what he has just presented here. The foreign exchange available in the market has dried up completely. And as a result, importers will have to wait in a long wait list. Exporters are waiting until Governor Cabraal is changing the exchange rate in order to bring the foreign exchange back to Sri Lanka. And there is a massive black market that has been developed for the first time in Sri Lanka after 1977. And normally in a black market, the premium available in the black market is about 2 or 3 rupees above the official rate. But today, contrary to what the central bank has been maintaining, that there is enough foreign exchange, there is enough foreign exchange inflows into the country, the black market premium has increased to about 40 rupees today. So which actually indicates that the government and the central bank are unable to generate a sufficient inflow of foreign exchange to Sri Lanka through this official exchange rate, which the Governor Cabraal wants to maintain till the end of this year. So this is a very critical issue that we have to look at. I can explain the present situation in a parable, like the parable used by Basil Rajapakse. Imagine there is a family where there is a son who has a cancer. The parents think that they know better than anyone else. Therefore, they don't want to take the son to a physician, qualified physician. Instead, they try to treat him with homegrown remedies. So as a result, he's been treated with all types of medicine that had been purchased or borrowed from the neighbors. And they think that they know better. And in fact, they shower the sick child with gifts by borrowing money from outsiders. They can borrow money from their neighbors as well as people who are living abroad, and they borrow money and they shower the child thinking that showering the child with toys would improve his health conditions. When the visitors come, they also glorify the parents, saying that they are doing the good, correct thing by using these homegrown remedy measures to cure the child. And therefore, the parents are further encouraged to continue with this type of, homegrown remedy procedures. And when the outsiders point out to the parents that they have to take the child to a qualified physician in order to have him cured, the parents dismiss those suggestions, saying that they know better and they have the capacity to manage it, and therefore there's no necessity to take him to an outside physician. But the disease which had been inflicted, the child has become worse and he eventually dies, then it will become too late for the parents to take him to a physician. So Sri Lanka's present situation is exactly like this. And we have a government, we have a central bank, which thinks that, they know better than other people. They have the homegrown policy measures, and those homegrown policy measures will eventually lead Sri Lanka to a bankruptcy, and which is a critical missing link in the budget, as well as the presentation made by Governor Cabraal. So now the present situation, despite the fact that Governor is very confident that we have enough foreign exchange, but the situation that we have is it depicts a completely different picture. The different picture is, for the first time in history after 1977, the net foreign assets of the central bank has become negative today. And the negative figure is increasing month after month. In fact, of course, we had a negative foreign exchange position from 1962 to 1976. And during that time, when the central banks had more foreign liabilities than foreign assets, central bank was not able to maintain the fixed exchange rate, as well as central bank was not able to support the import program during that period. And everyone knows the result was we had import controls, exchange controls, price controls, travel controls, and we had all types of controls, and the result was the low growth and the soaring of unemployment and poverty in Sri Lanka. Now, in August this year, the central bank's net foreign assets have become negative by about $400 billion. By September, it had gone up to $790 million. In October, to $1,200 million. And it has been reported in the newspapers that the gross foreign assets of the central bank has fallen to $1.6 billion by the middle of November, meaning that the net foreign asset position of the central bank is negative by about, say, $2 billion. So what it means is we don't have enough foreign exchange in order to maintain this import program for the country, which is a very serious situation. So what this is a serious risk, and if we don't have sufficient foreign exchange inflows to Sri Lanka within the next 6-week period, we will end up the end year also with a similarly high negative net foreign asset position of with the central bank. Of course, the Governor Cabraal had earlier said that it's not a matter to be worried, because he had said he is expecting so much of new foreign exchange inflows to the country. But what matters to us is we have already gone through this situation in the central bank from 1962 to 1976, and we know the results. So therefore, my guess is that we are repeating the same bad experience, bad performance now with this negative net foreign exchange position of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka. Instead of going to IMF, he had categorically said that the government doesn't want to go to IMF. He had said he doesn't want to go to IMF because he has this homegrown policy measure. But what we have to remember here is that the type of foreign exchange inflows that he's expecting, the non-traditional imports flows, will not generate a sufficient foreign exchange inflow to the country to take us out of the current foreign exchange crisis. Now, for example, there is a proposal to issue these green bonds. Green bonds are linked to environmental projects and they are not available for normal financing of the government. It takes time for Sri Lanka to prepare those environmental projects and solicit investment from outside investors into those projects, and it will take time, and we will not get sufficient foreign exchange inflow into Sri Lanka's foreign exchange market within the next 2 to 3 month time period. The second one is the central bank has already announced that it has invited arrangers to issue securitization of the normal remittances flows to Sri Lanka. And securitization is a good technique where a lender, an asset holder is able to convert an illiquid asset into a liquid asset. For example, if I have given a loan to somebody, and if that person repays the loan in say 5 years time, I have to wait 5 years time in order to get the money back. But if I need money right now, I can securitize the loan and raise money from the market. Now, what is happening here is the remittances are received by commercial banks. Once they are received, the central bank had asked them to sell 10% of those remittances to central bank, and according to central bank numbers, because the remittances flow had actually dwindled in 2021, every month the central bank would be getting about 25 million US dollars. So in 4 months' time, the central bank may be collecting about 100 million US dollars, which are presently available to central bank in liquid cash form. But when you want to securitize that, you have to hand over the 100 million US dollars to an outside special purpose vehicle, overseas special purpose vehicle, where the central bank will lose control over it. Central bank would be able to raise money by securitizing, but it has to pay an interest. So this is a technique where the central bank is planning to convert a liquid asset, already liquid asset, into a costly liquid asset. So therefore, I don't think Governor Cabraal would be able to meet all his targets. So my final recommendation to him is, there is no any loss of face for him. He will have to advise the government, advise the finance minister that Sri Lanka should go to IMF and seek IMF support in order to come out of present foreign exchange crisis. If you don't do that, what would happen is, just like the child who has been treated with these homegrown remedies, the child will die, Sri Lanka's economy will also die. So that is my final advice. I will leave. Arun, I have to leave because I have a lecture now.
That's so right, yes.
I will remain here to answer 1 or 2 questions that you might have for me.
Well, I think we're just moving on in the interest of time, but we're very grateful, Mr. Wijewardena, for that analysis from the ground level, as it were, and those cautionary notes that were sounded, helping us to appreciate the impairments and the impediments to real growth. In fact, you use the term sick economy, and that tells quite a story. And also the black market was also a very serious issue that you did draw attention to. But thank you very much. And we must, perforce, move on to the third of our keynote speakers, who also will likely provide us perspective from the outside, as it were. We have the senior advisor of the Boston Consultancy Group here with us, and that's Mr. Subram Ramaswamy. So let me invite Subram now to take over. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Arun. Good evening to everyone. It is indeed a privilege to be part of such a distinguished gathering. We have policymakers, public officials, economists, professionals, corporate leaders, entrepreneurs. And so thank you again for inviting us to the ICC, and other partners for inviting us to be part of this panel. I know that most of you here are familiar with BCG, and I have the privilege of knowing many of those participating here today. But for the benefit of others and those joining via social media, I'll just take a few seconds to introduce BCG to you. BCG, or the Boston Consulting Group, is one of the premier management consulting outfits in the world, with about 90 offices in over 50 countries. They employ over 16,000 consultants, and revenues in excess of $6 billion US, growing for the past 20 years. In fact, it's the largest, fastest growing management consultancy at a CAGR of about 14%. I am a senior advisor to BCG in Sri Lanka. My background has been in financial services and management consulting, both in the US and Sri Lanka. I had prepared these remarks beforehand and had comments similar to what the governor made on the theme of this webinar. And at the risk of being accused of copying or cribbing from the governor, I think it's still worth repeating. I wanted to commend the organizers, Mr. Virat Kodi, Mr. Kasim, and others, not just for organizing this webinar with such an influential and diverse group of participants, but also for the theme they chose: projections, possibilities, policies, and opportunities. I think it's a great theme. I particularly like the use of the words possibilities and opportunities. I highlight this because one sees and hears a lot of criticism of budget, of policies, and many other things in all walks of life, in fact, and this is an age-old phenomenon. This is not to say that those criticizing the budget or anything else shouldn't be doing that. Of course, criticism is good. I would even argue that it is essential, but only if it's constructive and helps improve a situation, or at least is made with that intent. Indeed, given the situation Sri Lanka finds itself in today, a united approach with constructive solutions, ideas, and very importantly, open minds is a need of the hour. So, kudos from me too to the organizers for setting that tone. In my remarks today, I don't intend to analyze or dissect the budget in detail. This has been done quite a lot during the past few days. Pros and cons have been highlighted. And indeed, the governor and the eminent economist, Mr. Wijewardena, who spoke before me, have also weighed in on that. The governor presented a more optimistic and positive picture of the current situation, whereas Mr. Wijewardena brought us back to ground, I should say, with some very salient facts and figures. I intend to take a more high-level approach, highlighting some of the key aspects of the budgets as I see them, opportunities stemming from them, and also importantly, the approach or the follow-up needed going forward. So my take is not discussing the immediate crisis, which has been discussed, and again, Mr. Wijewardena made some very salient points, but to look at the proposals of the budget from a slightly longer term. The proposals came in the backdrop of a very challenging economic situation Sri Lanka finds itself in. Again, at the risk of repeating others before me, some of these challenges or the primary challenges are revenue shortfall to meet country's annual domestic expenditure, funds to meet its international debt obligations, the availability of foreign currency for doing business with the rest of the world, and of course, the trickle-down effect of these challenges to the general population. These challenges are not entirely new to us. We have faced these concerns in varying degrees over many years, but now they have been compounded many times over due to the pandemic situation which followed close on the heels of the Easter bombings of 2019. And due to the interconnectedness of these challenges, a worsening situation in one area affects other areas negatively as well. It's a vicious cycle. In fact, even some actions taken to address the situation in one area can have a negative outcome in another. Therefore, it was unrealistic, and I don't think anybody did expect the budget proposals to be a panacea for our economic ills. In its current state, the Sri Lankan economy needs both emergency intervention, as Mr. Wijewardena pointed out, as well as long-term plan to get back to a sustainable growth-focused economic trend situation. I believe the 2020 budget did try to address both those needs. In terms of emergency intervention, the one-off taxes to raise funds urgently needed to meet debt obligations, as well as provide support to industries and livelihoods devastated by the effects of the pandemic, stand out. As painful as these may be, I think it was not completely unexpected, given the current situation. We know that similar one-off taxes have been used in the past, in arguably less dire circumstances. This is not to say that this practice should be resorted to periodically. There may be other more systematic solutions to optimize tax revenue collection. In terms of the medium to long-term focus, there were a number of encouraging proposals, such as the finance bill for exporters, future-focused skills training, setting up of technology parks, to cite just a few examples of the many proposals. These are important steps to reset and drive the country's economic growth trajectory. Also, to focus on initiatives to meet climate change challenges, and the intention to use digitization as an enabler should be highlighted. Another welcome aspect of the 2022 budget are the proposals to hold state institutions more accountable for their spending, along with the introduction of KPIs and tighter controls on disbursement of funds. Other austerity measures and the modernization of procurement processes to reflect international norms can all be considered as the right moves in the right direction. Two areas we didn't see explicitly highlighted in the budget, highlighted in the budget were overtures to the tourism industry and the sources of funding to meet foreign debt obligations. Now, on the foreign debt obligations, the governor was very optimistic of being able to meet these obligations, and there was a counter view proposed. But let me first talk on the tourism. In tourism, the revitalization of the industry is vital, not just because of the hardships faced by the millions dependent on it, but also because it's one of Sri Lanka's most established and leading sources of foreign exchange. And very importantly, in our current situation, it requires no significant immediate investment in infrastructure or lead time to start generating revenue. That said, the industry has to be ready to offer the best product possible and will need support to get back on track. It will also need some retooling towards areas of new focus. We know that funds have been allocated for the promotion and marketing of Sri Lanka as a destination. We hope more measures are on the way in line with industry priorities and requirements. As I mentioned earlier, tourism should be considered one of the lead industries in the plan for economic recovery, and it should be considered a matter of urgent priority. In terms of sources of funding to meet upcoming debt obligations, I won't go into this in detail because it has already been touched on. But there are usually several options for obtaining funds, such as international debt markets, loans from other governments, swaps, and lines from international financial institutions like the IMF. Some of these options, such as borrowing on the international debt market, may not be viable in the current context of diminished credit ratings. Also, all of these options come with obligations, not just the direct cost of debt servicing, but other obligations such as trade conditions or structural change requirements. I will just say that it is vitally important that any solution to this funding issue is part of a carefully considered long-term plan, a plan that takes into account the country's future economic goals and priorities, and one that best enables Sri Lanka to achieve those goals. Stopgap measures, while sometimes necessary, by their very nature, do not usually lend themselves to long-term solutions. Indeed, some stopgap measures taken might well add to the problem over the medium to long term. Getting back to the proposals made in the budget, there are several critical follow-up actions and requirements that need to be fulfilled. Now, these are not anything new or groundbreaking, but they are important enough to bear repeating. One is the importance of planning. Planning, obviously, at the initiative level, but it is also important to have a holistic view of the many new initiatives and pushes and how they fit and contribute to the larger national plan of development. This is particularly important given the scarce resources at hand and the competing claims for those resources. It might be necessary to prioritize and sequence some initiatives. Quick and effective implementation is another aspect. Encouraging as many proposals are, they can only bear fruit with effective implementation. Whether it's drafting laws or new legal frameworks or allocating the necessary resources, it is important to move quickly, although with sufficient consideration of the outcomes and consultation with stakeholders. Fostering confidence is another critical requirement. whether it's attracting FDI, encouraging local investment and entrepreneurs, or even selling a shift in policy direction to your citizens, creating and maintaining a degree of confidence is of utmost importance. All incentives in the world will not matter if investors do not have confidence in a country. How does a country, or for that matter, a company, or even an individual, engender confidence? There are obviously many aspects to this important topic, and we could spend the entire webinar discussing this, but it helps to think of it broadly in terms of the 4 big C's of confidence: clarity, consistency, continuity, and commitment. Clarity of purpose, of policy, of expectations, and of limitations. Consistency in message, in investor experience, and in support structures. Continuity of policies and of undertakings. And commitment. Commitment standing by agreements, and more importantly, standing by each other, working towards the best mutual outcome in times of unavoidable disruptions. As we know, all best laid plans or plans with the best intentions, there's always some deviation or a curveball that comes in. So it's not that we can make plans and policies bulletproof in terms of not being changeable, but we have to be able to provide the commitment that we will work to the best possible outcome for all parties. In closing, let me briefly touch on some of the possibilities and opportunities going forward. First, it's important to know that Sri Lanka has made good progress in tackling the pandemic situation, which really made an already challenging situation much worse. The vaccination program is well underway, and whilst we are in no way out of the woods yet, we have reached a point where we have to get on with life, in a new normal, if you like, while continuing to take precautions. So that in itself is a big positive to look forward to. More specifically to the budget proposals, many areas in industries earmarked for development in the budget are in fact areas where there is common consensus that we should focus on for the future. For example, the push on technology through parks and investment, use of tech in developing agriculture, streamlining and introducing laws and regulatory frameworks as business enablers. There might not be perfect agreement, there rarely is, but the thinking is aligned, and that is an important factor not to be underestimated. Translating these into action is the important next step. Finally, and on a more personal note, I hope that the hardships that we have endured, admittedly in different manifestations and varying degrees, and the budget proposals acknowledging the need for more efficiency and frugality, send a clear and pragmatic message to citizens from all walks of life. A message that reads, we cannot operate in a vacuum as if the rest of the world didn't matter, or be inflexible and insist on sticking to old beliefs and practices. Our experience with the pandemic and its aftermath should be, and actively encouraged to be, an opportunity for a shift in mindset, a shift to a growth mindset, where our individual successes do not have to be zero-sum outcomes, where everyone pulls together as one, as Sri Lankans, and putting aside petty or imagined differences. Thank you, and I look forward to a productive and enlightened interaction from the panel.
Thank you very much, Subram. I can appreciate that you have chosen to underscore the opportunities part of our theme today, and that was interesting. And of course, part of the plan, building confidence. It seems to be fundamental to being able to leverage on the opportunities. And thank you very much for those insights. Well, we must, of course, move on, and we do, with the panel discussion now. We have several panelists, and let me introduce them by name. And then the program will be that the first part of the Q&A, or the question and the conversation with the panelists, will be conducted by Mr. Kasim, who of course hardly needs any introduction. He's the editor-in-chief and founding editor and CEO of the Daily FT. And thereafter, after about an hour, roughly an hour, we will invite Mr. Dinesh Virakodi to also be engaged in the conversation, and he will have what we refer to as quick-fire questions, those that have emerged from the platforms, the Facebook platforms, that we have described before, and some thoughts are coming in from those. So the panelists are, not in any particular order or preference, but I've got the list here. We have the chairman of Softlogic Holdings PLC, a very well-known businessman in Sri Lanka, Mr. Ashok Pathirage. Also the chairman of ICTA and Director General of Telecommunications Regulatory Commission of Sri Lanka, Mr. Oshada Senanayake. Then too, we have Honorable Member of Parliament, Dr. Harini Amarasuriya, who's a member, as I said, a member of Parliament, and of course is in the opposition at the present time. We have Mr. Sanjaya Mohottala, who's the chairman of the Board of Investment of Sri Lanka. Then the senior partner and head of taxing or taxation of Ernst & Young, Mr. Duminda Hulangamuwa. Then Ms. Kasthuri Chellaraja, very well known again, the executive director and group CEO of Hemas Holdings PLC. Then too, we have the global consultant on entrepreneurship and also is a member of the World Economic Forum Expert Network, Mr. Talal Rafi. Then the chairman of the People's Bank of Sri Lanka, Mr. Sujeewa Rajapakse, CEO of the Hatton National Bank, Mr. Jonathan Alice, and representing the business element, the group CEO, Diesel and Motor Engineering PLC, also known as DIMO, Mr. Ghanat Pandithage. So that's our panel. And I'm going to hand over proceedings for the first part to Mr. Kasim.
Thank you very much, Arun. Good to moderate this panel. Interesting. I would like to invite Ashok to. I have some questions, but Ashok, would you like to sort of summarize your own views on the budget, the good and the bad, and the ugly, maybe? Briefly.
Anyway, yeah, thank you. Thank you, Nista, and everyone for having me. So, given the current situation of the economy, right? So I don't think that we would have expected anything better than what's been proposed in the budget. We all know that we have challenges. We just listened to the governor, and we also listened to Mr. Wijewardena. Obviously, right, he had completely different, ideas from what the governor was speaking. So we believe, right, I'm sure, right, the business community need, stability, right? So that is something, right, which is missing at the moment, right, unfortunately. And also, I think from the government perspective, I think we feel that, we need to build confidence. I think that was touched by Mr. Subram, I think. So confidence is the key, right, today, right? If you need foreign investments or even to keep your existing investors, satisfied, right? Without moving away from the investments, I think we need to build confidence, right? I think key problem for that today is the foreign exchange, the rupee against the dollar, right? Yes, we heard from the governor, he was very confident, and I hope that, he can execute whatever his plans. That's what exactly the country requires. So hopefully the confidence will take place, and, stability automatically will create. That's the environment that we want to operate in. So we have not seen that for a while. But hopefully, right, I would say pretty quickly that we may have to do that, given the current situation in the country.
Do you see the budget as a first step towards building that confidence, or do you see hope?
So actually, right, I would say, right, the first step what I saw was appointing Mr. Nivard Cabraal as the governor, right? Because I think that was very much needed, before the budget, right? So budget, I felt, obviously, right, the government policies, what we have seen that they want to encourage exports, right? All what we wanted to see was there in the budget. But to achieve all those things, as I said, we need to overcome some of the hurdles. The main one today is, foreign income, right? Without the dollars coming in, we will not be able to stabilize the, this situation. So I think that has to be addressed. So that is why I thought that the appointment of, Mr. Nivard Cabraal as the governor was very key to me. And of course, you know that, I mean, you have heard from and you listened to him, right, from the time of his appointment. And we have also, I mean, obviously have experienced him being a governor before, and he has done pretty good stuff, I mean, in very difficult circumstances, right? We all expect that, I mean, he will be able to execute his plan and, you know, build that confidence and stability.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, we'll come back to Ashok. Kasthuri, your one quick on the budget. Give me an overview if possible.
Good evening, everyone. And Nista, in order not to repeat myself, I guess this budget was trying to establish some kind of consistency, but in the process, there was consistently inconsistent on the same track. I guess it was a fine balance between finding generating revenue through sustainable means versus generating revenue through ad hoc short-term means. So I think, as Ashok alluded, there were certain taxes which people have to stomach, but how sustainable is it? So in this context, our country is at a point that the budget was done in a backdrop of the country not having adequate dwindling reserves. It did not allude to giving external confidence in terms of the rating of a country, so that you have the ability to go out and raise alternate debt if your credit ratings go up. So that was not addressed. From a private sector point of view, yes, they gave consistency for most part from the employment and from corporates on certain taxes as well as consumer taxes. But on the other side, there were certain ad hoc taxes which might not be practical for the SMEs and how it's going to be rolled out. I didn't particularly, even though our country is always annually we have a deficit, and this deficit keeps growing, and our expenditure clearly surpasses any revenues we generate. So in order to move our deficit down from a GDP perspective, we have to have real GDP growth. We don't see that coming out, even though the intention is there with curtailed expenditure. I didn't see any underlying productivity improvements to ensure that we have certain long-term growth. So while I like the first phase of the intention of investing in water irrigation and agri, which is downstream and it's important, and the intention that there is going to be financial kind of planning for the public sector and curtailing that, putting in more employment into an inefficient sector without addressing the root cause of correcting the efficiency and being productive in those industries, which will in turn force the private sector also to be more competitive. That is not going to solve, that's worrying, because next year we are going to be in the same situation. We are going to have the same problem of the deficit. How are you going to generate revenue? Because remember, this out of the revenue raising, 50% is coming from these one-off taxes. And next 12 months down the line, what are you going to do? Because the next 3 months, the fire is about how do you raise funds to supplement reserves so that your day-to-day imports can function, we can pay our essential bills, then raise funds through some form of the debt to pay up the old debts which are falling due in the next 2 months. So while it has eased up certain, it has been consistent and not tried to make it too volatile for people, it's also not answering or addressing the very hard issues which we're facing.
Okay, thanks. Ashok and Kasthuri, just I want a direct response from both of you in terms of the surcharge, the one-off taxes, and the social security levy, particularly affecting the low margin business. And Ashok, I think most of your business are on low margins. What would be your response? Could government look at some other alternative given the current situation? I want Kasthuri also to come back on that. Ashok?
Yeah, so in terms of this one-off tax, I mean, See, you see, as a private sector, we don't mind, if the country is in trouble, right? I mean, obviously that we would like to, help the country. But at the same time, as I said, it's also very important that we have consistent policies and that, that the platform being built for private sector to do business without any difficulty. So I mean, investing one-off with the government to help the country, come out of this is all good. But we also need to see that continuation of, building that consistency and platform so that private sector can do business without any issues. So then coming back to your, that whatever 2% or something, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, there's no choice. We will pass that to the consumer. So I mean, so what is because we all work on very tight margins, right? I mean, there's no way that we could absorb 2%. If you look at our P&Ls, we probably don't even make that, right? So I mean, so in that kind of a situation, how do you, absorb something like that? So I think what is going to happen is obviously the price increase. So that will set the inflation high. So I mean, so it's going to be a, it's going to be a bad impact, at the end of the day on the economy again, right? So, so I think, so these are the issues. I mean, we understand, I don't know how long they're going to continue those. If these are short-term measures for 1 year, we are okay. We are willing to, stay with that. But still for all, I think probably it's not only us, probably everybody will pass that to the, end customer.
Okay, fine. Kasthuri, what do you think the prospect of passing on to customers?
Mr. Ashok is right. There's no choice. Even if you're a manufacturer or a trading business, remember the trading businesses, even the importer runs on a very small margin. And when it's 2.5% of turnover, it doesn't have a P&L to support it. But remember, whether it is import or manufacturers, to get the product right to the consumer, there are different small players in the value chain, from distributors and retailers. Now, they operate on very small margins. And this 2% on the top turnover is going to make them totally not viable. So, but the concerning thing is there is no clarity, because there is cascading effect. It goes tax on tax, and the same top line is taxed three times by the time it reaches the consumer. And technically, the consumer will be getting about 7% in terms of a tax if you talk about a distributor retail chain. And that is going to add to the cost of the product. But more importantly, the middleman, the distributors who are island-wide, the SME won't be able to survive. But so alternatively, what do you have? I think I was curious why, in order to be perceived as consistent, we moved away from looking at this VAT tax rate. Remember, we came down to a rate. If you need it, you increase the VAT, because it's not a cascading. It goes on value-added terms. And you've gone to a new tax again, and it has a new set of administrative challenges, from systems to processes and financial challenges. So for me, while socially there is responsibility from a government, people's perspective, from the haves to support the have-nots, I don't think in the process you create more have-nots in the process just to support something else. And the second thing, I think, whilst this money is being put from the private sector in some form, whether it's this or VAT, or when they eliminate the cascading effect and you kind of take out all those anomalies, how do they use it? There has to be clarity, because it's end of the day, it's a consumer's tax or the private sector's the money. It has to be used effectively. It has to go to the right person for the right cause. It cannot be money being doled out. Again, it's going to be just another waste of private sector funds. And the other side, what does the state taking? I saw they have said KPIs. It's my pet subject, but look, you need both hands to clap. You cannot be ignoring that side and telling the private sector, you be efficient, because all our taxes goes to pay salaries to more people who are going into the state. So some ways that bullet is hard to swallow. you would see uprising of salary increases, they'll be asking. But what I'm trying to say is make it productive. However, what productivity means is unique to each of those institutions. We are forced to be productive to be more profitable. The same should go there, and that's the only way the country can come up together.
Okay, excellent. Thanks, Kasthuri and Ashok. We'll come back to you with more questions. I move on to Sanjay, the chairman of the BOI. Sanjay, I know you have to go a bit early. Just a quick one. There was so much talk about boosting foreign reserves and non-debt inflows, and exports is a key factor. Do you see budget giving any stimulus? We didn't see anything specific, but do you see budget encouraging a quicker growth in exports?
Thanks, Nista, and thanks, team, for having me. And I think on that question, if you look at like a quick stimulus to spur exports for next year, we didn't have a specific outline. But in the short to medium term, I think there were a couple of things. One was that starting businesses and collecting finances or collecting fees. And I think this is a good thing because this is something that we've been trying. But it should not be stopped at just fees, because you should look at what stock exchange is doing, where all the information for opening an account is collected at one point. And we are trying to do the same at BOI in terms of collecting all the information at one location and disseminating across the multiple agencies. So an issue that has been at the forefront but been elevated at the national level to solve, I think it's a good thing because it will help exporters and as well as business communities as well. I think some of the problems around setting up tech companies, which I think was an important thing, because a lot of people are moving to gig economy and working from home and providing services to foreign countries. So if that is facilitated, that will enable a level of exports through services that will come in. And the last part of it is like, I think we've been talking about the utopia of having a single day, single window approval for businesses, which is not possible because of sometimes the complex nature of the business. But at least putting focus on around the cross sectors that we have identified and building a whole bunch of zones to be able to facilitate the investors, both small and medium, and also the large investors. Moving them away from Colombo, I think those are good things, but they are not going to bear fruit right away to immediately fix the foreign currency issues. But I think most important thing is the providing as much as clarity and avoiding too much of how to say I wouldn't say reactionary measures is the right thing, but quick measures that have been taking, and which kind of creates a whole bullwhip effect in the export community. I think that is important to have a peace of mind for them to focus outside versus going around and lobbying and trying to get some of the things in line to get the exports going. So, and also some of the approvals and really reducing some of the red tape around some of the approvals and a few other things, banned items which is needed for exports and all that. I think those have been outlined as like priorities to fix. I hope it will get fixed, because I think there was a lot of back and forth, and I'm sure the community know here many a times the some level of how do I say facilitation was required. So if that is taken out, I think we probably could see a much faster, much better year of exports, because BOI from BOI companies, we have met the 2019 run rate already. We'll be surpassing the 2019, but global, the countrywide exports will exceed 2019. It's a good thing. So hopefully we can keep the momentum next year as well.
Okay, thanks. Other one is, of course, which is your core subject about FDI. There's so much of reliance on the port city, which we are yet to see it taking off. In that context, what's the challenge like increasing FDIs, particularly into 2022?
So I think some of those clarities, Nista, brought the 2.5% what Kasthuri talked about, right, is needed because here we are building fabric parks to localize production of fabrics. But if you're going to hit it twice on the top line, let's be frank, it's not going to be as lucrative as what the investors will look at. And I've been told that some of them are going to get better clarity from the budget point of view how that's going to go through. Because if it was VAT, it is on value-added purposes, so it's good. So that will happen. But I think on the FDI in the port city, most of the regulation, I think they have got PwC and a few other. Maybe I was wrong. Should not misquote. A couple of companies to help in terms of putting some of the framework. Oshada and I have been pushing on some of the tech companies to look at use the port city framework to set up companies, data centers, and so on and so forth. So there is opportunity, but the question always comes in because the crisis is near and how long it will be. But I have no doubt port city will deliver what it needs to deliver in the medium term to long term. But the question is, how quickly can you make it deliver what we need, given the need of the hour? So I think where we could probably facilitate is most of the services companies to set up build through rather than be captives, as we call it, or body shops, as we call it for IT companies, but rather be revenue build through companies. And I think that's a way to start this up and get quick benefit from port city framework.
Okay, thank you, Sanjay. We will come back to you if you are still online. I'd like to move on to Dr. Amarasuriya, Dr. Harini Amarasuriya. I hope you're online with us.
Yes,
yeah.
I am.
Yeah, thank you very much. One of the biggest criticism on the budget was that government didn't really give any relief to addressing the cost of living and the shortage issues. What is your perspective in terms of why do you think government failed in addressing that core issue, and there is no kind of relief going forward either in terms of the shortages what is being faced?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me on this panel. I think the problems that our economy is facing have been discussed very adequately so far. And I think what was disappointing about this particular budget was that it did not seem to have either a sort of a short-term vision nor a longer-term vision of addressing some of the fundamental problems that our economy is facing. So in that sense, I think what is really of concern here is that the spiraling cost of living has actually, there is no real intervention proposed in the budget to meet with this concern. And that's going to affect overall political and social stability, which in turn will have an impact on how the economy will be able to function in the months and days and months to come as people start feeling the pinch. With inflation going up, food shortages that are bound to occur, also with the crisis in agriculture, all of these issues compounded by rising cost of living is really we can predict a very, very unstable new year, right? And that is not going to be good for anyone. It's not going to be good politically. It's certainly not going to be able to attract the kind of revenue and investments the country is hoping to recover from this crisis. And I must also say this, I don't think that this is necessarily a problem that was generated just in this year or the last year. I think this is an effect of sort of years of mismanagement of the economy, and basically where our fundamentals have really not been dealt with properly. And the burden, the real burden of that is going to be felt by the most vulnerable in the country. So the fact that the government, it's hard to, the government sort of response during the budget debate to this question has been that they are allocating money to Grama Niladhari divisions. They're thinking in terms of sort of increasing livelihood opportunities. They're also setting up entrepreneurship schemes that they've talked about reorganizing Samurdhi. All right, all of these measures have been suggested in the budget, but the problem is that unless there is sort of an overall plan, someone talked about consistency, unless there's some overall plan that is driving all of these measures, just distributing money locally, whether it's through the Grama Niladhari divisions or the members of parliament for whom also allocations have been increased in the budget, that's really not going to resolve the problem that people are facing with regard to cost of living. I think the government's approach has been rather to sort of look at improving livelihoods, right? So investing in livelihood opportunities and support mechanisms at the local level. But for that to be successful, I think there has to be a real proper coordination and a proper sort of plan that can be implemented at the local level. And that is certainly not evident in this budget.
Okay, excellent. I think Kasthuri mentioned about public sector accountability, them also improving on the productivity. There are some proposals on public sector reforms in a big way. What is your perspective? You think government is on the right track in terms of addressing the public sector reforms, or you feel there needs to be more policy or action-oriented measures?
But I think the problem with our public sector, and here I may be taking a slightly different point of view from some of the members on this panel, I think the issue is not so much the inefficiency of the, I think we need an effective and strong public sector, right? A country needs a public sector and needs a strong public sector. But if you look now, I mean, several MPs have also recently referred to the public sector as a burden, but I'd really like to inquire as to how it became a burden. It became a burden because politicians use the public sector as a source of sort of, extending their patronage, right? Sort of an employment bank for politicians, right? So that is a problem that was created by our political culture. So in that sense, I think what we require is, when we are talking about strengthening the public sector or making it more efficient, essentially, this is a problem of our political system and our political culture. So we have to address that. And unless we address that, simply sort of, laying off people or sort of complaining about the public system per se is not going to be the answer. So I think, actually, even if you look at the other issues that we are talking about, even more than an economic problem, we are facing a very serious political problem, a political problem of a political culture which is supportive of corruption, which, and unless we sort of root out that, unless we root out the kind of privileged political culture that exists in our system, in our society, none of these things that we are talking about can be resolved either in the short term or in the long term.
Okay, thank you, Doctor. We'll come back to you in the next round as well. Oshada, I want to move on to Oshada. There was so much emphasis on the TRC and ICTA in terms of expanding the broadband connectivity, digital infrastructure, and of course, we're talking about a new fuel that will sort of ignite the economy is the digital, the layers of the country. What can you expand on that, Oshada, in terms of what kind of a roadmap we can expect here?
Absolutely, Nista. I think it has been done with all rightful intentions, and listening to all the other panelists and literally the situation we have, I think it's a global recession as we talk about, brought forward by the COVID pandemic. I mean, just yesterday I was looking at international news, certain countries are facing a 31-year high recession and inflation. So I think these are situations that we need to look at in a different way, and then that's how we technologists see it. And that's why it's very important that we look at this from a technology perspective. Now, with all due respect to all traditional exports, for example, Nista, I think it's about time that we change the country strategy as well. We need to understand what our strengths are. We need to understand how to leverage and create a value proposition as a country moving forward. And I think if we don't, and if we look at the traditional perspective of just moving forward and trying to recreate the economic position we were pre-COVID, I don't think it's going to work out. So I think the future for Sri Lanka is going to revolve and pivot around technology. It's going to revolve around the fact that how well we can position Sri Lanka as a technology hub and a destination so that other MNCs can come and springboard from Sri Lanka and radiate their services out to the larger Asian region. I think that is key for us, Nista. So that's why there's a lot of focus put on the telecommunications sector and the ICT sector, and I'll explain how. The telecommunications sector, we've been, for the last 2 years, Nista, we've been talking about a digital inclusive, smart Sri Lanka driven by a digital economy. So if you look at each tenet of this, digital inclusivity, if you take it, it's about digital skills, right? The second point is accessibility and affordability. Right now, these three pillars, if you don't get it right, we cannot position ourselves as a technology hub. And I'll explain how it works out. Now, if you look at today, the Gamata Sannivedana, the Connect Sri Lanka project, I mean, this is not something that we reacted as a project to COVID. We started it in 2019 December, because we very well understood that without getting our core infrastructure right, the core piece of infrastructure that's required for a true to life digital transformation of a country is connectivity. So that's why we've been investing, and the TRC has been investing for the last 2 years on expanding our connectivity infrastructure. And that's one aspect. The second aspect is the affordability. Now, again, as my fellow panelists have been talking about, I think we need to have long-term strategic tax policies. If you look at the telco sector, just 2 years back, I'm not blaming anybody, consecutive governments, just not one government, consecutive governments for decades have taken very short-term tax decisions on the telecommunication industry. We need to understand the telecommunication industry is not just providing telephony services anymore. It is going to be the crux of the digital layer, the foundation that all digital transformation of any country will come through. I mean, this has been talked about the International Telecommunication ITU 2030 agenda itself. So just let's rewind 3-4 years back. I mean, we as consumers have been paying 47.6% of tax, Nista, on our communication. Now, what does that augur for digital inclusion, right? Today, we brought it down to overall tax of 22.6%. For data, it's low as 10.2%. Now, the question, I think, when we look at the cost of living from a traditional perspective, I think we need to look at this perspective very importantly. And I can assure you, I think this strategy of, as Kasthuri mentioned, the ensuring consistency of this tax regime for the telecommunication industry has brought fantastic dividends for us, Nista. Today, as I speak, I can proudly state, based on the, don't take my word for this, go on the International Telecommunication Union latest country benchmarking report, Global 2021, Sri Lanka has broken through to the top 20 in terms of the most affordable fixed broadband. We are on the 20th. It keeps getting better. For mobile broadband, we are the 13th cheapest in the world. And for voice mobile, we are the 7th. So this historical. I mean, I'm not bragging, but I think this is something that I need to state, right? And I think that that's a good statement that our tax policies, I'm speaking for my two industries, has been solid. Now, when we look at the current budget, of course, there's a slight negative. The VAT being replaced on the telecommunication industry by the special goods GST. Now that's going to remove that input VAT reclaim component. Now, of course, that might have a negative impact on long-term investments, but definitely it's not going to trickle down to the consumer taxes. Of course, the 2.5% social security component will come in. So I believe we can hold sway on that global rankings we've taken, Nista. In terms of the new technology, the 5G aspect that was also elaborated on on the budget, I believe, again, we have to start thinking about new avenues of revenue. So that's hence the reason that I proposed even auctioning new spectrum. Gone are the days that, the TRC has basically, given out spectrum for political reasons, right? I mean, this has been the story of our life for the last 2-3 decades. I mean, this is a reality, right? Every country goes on an open auction bid system for spectrum, except Sri Lanka. So I think we have to move on to that. And the reason is we are poised to gain the best when we go on our open bid on this spectrum. Now, if you take again 5G, it's just not merely auction of spectrum. The future of Sri Lanka in terms of looking at, attracting investments in terms of data centers, attracting high technology multinationals. I mean, data centers is not just about enhanced mobile broadband download speeds. We are talking about, massive machine type communications, Internet of Things, low latencies that's required for basic operations of smart industry, IR 4.0 ready data warehouses, for example. So if we don't have these technology pillars in Sri Lanka, there's no point us talking about, being a destination for technology, and it's going to just be lip service, right? So I think from a longer term perspective, I think we made the right decisions, and I'm glad that this time also the status quo has been maintained. In terms of the ICT aspect, we are looking at a very bold $3 billion export mark, Nista. Again, for the last 8 years, I come from the industry and as an entrepreneur. I mean, I've had enough of the country being talked about as a $5 billion export for ICT. I mean, I hear this from 2012 to 2013, right? And hence the reason this time around, we recalibrated. We have to be very honest to ourselves as a country. And hence the reason we recalibrated at $3 billion, because we have a situation at hand. We need to understand, we need to also do capacity planning for human capital and trained human capital at that. So if you are having today, as we speak, a $1.5 billion ICT export market driven by 150,000 ICT workforce, I mean, you can't just aim at billion without having a concerted plan on ensuring that we have new sources of human capital come in. We have to have a pragmatic approach. And this $1.5 billion mark today, I mean, we are the 5th largest exporter earner in terms of ICT. I think it's not only the service sector we need to look at, Nista. Now, we've been traditionally looking at ICT as a service destination, as Sanjay also mentioned. We want to look at a component of creating our own intellectual property. We want to create our own products. That's where the game changer is, Nista, right? I mean, if you look at the products that has gone out of Sri Lanka without any support of any government, right? That's been phenomenal. Just imagine if we can handhold that products to go out. We have products that sitting on the boardrooms of Fortune 100s as we speak, right? So one aspect also we are looking at is encouraging startups and beating up the startups to contribute back to the economy. And I'll give another example on statistics. Just in 2018, our startup ecosystem was just $29 million US dollars. Today, we are at 117 million US dollars. Still minute if you look at the broader picture, but I think we need to really encourage the startup ecosystem to grow next. I mean, our, pardon me for saying this, I have panelists from the banks as well. Our banking systems has to evolve. There has to be a pragmatic thought of investing on risk in terms of startups. I know the typical collateral doesn't work with the startups, you know, and raising working capital, raising seed capital in Sri Lanka is harder than for me going into Singapore and setting up a company and basically spinning up seed capital or startup capital. So I think there's a lot of aspects we need to look at, Nista. And I think from a regulatory perspective and a legislative perspective, the likes of the Data Protection Act, which we just got the nod last week from the cabinet, I think these are imperatives, Nista. I mean, we can't expect global MNCs to come in and basically set up data centers without having adequacy of data privacy frameworks, which is in line with the GDPR. We need to have our cybersecurity laws, which is also again passed in the parliament. So I think it's a pragmatic approach. Unfortunately, my belief is that to get out of these woods, I think we will have to focus on a very out-of-the-box thinking, not talk about parables anymore, but I think we have to really get our act together and really start thinking differently. And this is my take coming from the private sector and trying to contribute to this country's change.
Thanks, Oshada. That's excellent. I know, though you mentioned about affordability, we going up in the global rankings. But any user today, data user, if you talk to any parent, they keep scolding all the telcos for amazing amount of expenditure on the data. Why is that happening? And what is the regulator doing in terms of getting more transparent pricing? I don't know, maybe there is some, but how can you keep it low?
So thank you for raising that question up, Nista. In fact, this is what the media doesn't talk about, right? If you look at the whole phenomena of working from home and the studying from home, which were induced last year, if you look at our working from home component, the TRC last year introduced some special packages, right? The work from home packages. So this is the issue of pretty much parents not doing some due diligence on seeing what's out there, right? You use your standard packages of data now, you'll be paying 100 rupees per extra GB. But if you get that add-on that we push the telcos to get through, now it's all there, you can get a 100 GB pack that covers Google Classroom, Microsoft Teams to Zoom to all of that for a low rate as $4.99. Now do your math, is per GB less than 5 rupees. Now take the next package, you may think $499 is still daunting for a typical family. That's a $199 package at 30 GB, again at about 6 rupees, right? Now when you add up that, your child's consumption of data doesn't go through the main package. That's one example. And we've taken a massive step that was identified at the 50th anniversary of the International Telecommunication Union just last month. We've completely whitelisted the eTaksala, our learning platform for all government schools. Today, we are talking about 6 terabyte consumption of data per day, which is completely not charged at all, right? So we have 6 million which is 6 million hits per day, where parents are compelled to now basically home tutor their children because of the unfortunate teacher issue. And then we have 6 million hits per day. I mean, I'm talking about a year on year, Mr. Today, 6 million hits, and the complete eTaksala platform is completely made free of charge. And that's, for example, a child can go look at, videos there for 10 hours. It doesn't charge anything. We've extended the same thing for the state universities. Unfortunately, we can't do it for private universities. They are profit making. But for the state universities, the e-learning system is called Learn, the Learn network, We completely made it free of charge as well. And at this moment, I should thank the telecommunications sector for agreeing with us to do that. So this has been going on for 1 year. In fact, an ITU has recognized it on their 50th anniversary takeouts on this NISTA. So here's the thing, right? You can't be indifferent to what's changing. So I think the consumers has to also understand what's out there. Today, we are talking about unlimited packages for, entertainment. The COVID has changed the way we entertain ourselves even, right? You can't go out to a concert you wanted. I mean, just 1.5 years back, we weren't even opened up for Netflix, the Amazon Prime, and Spotify, right? Today, we've introduced everything and then on unlimited packages. So I think it's out there. It's just that people have to just research for themselves what out there. And in terms of, I can assure you, Nista, I think in terms of education, affordability on these platforms, I think we brought it down to near zero. For example, Itaksala and the Learn, plus even for the private sector. Whether your child goes to the private education institute, I mean, the special packages, I mean, it's cut down. And hence the reason I said, Nista, the ITU reports are a very independent report. They don't even reach out to the regulator to get statistics, right? And they've noted, well noted these points and then benchmark us. So I think no one can argue about ITU global report, right? I mean, if you look at the Indian, the Pakistan, and even the regional costs today of broadband, I mean, we are way ahead. I mean, in terms of the top 20, there's only 19 more countries ahead. I'm very confident by next year. I think my plan is to come up to the top 10. And I think the fact that we haven't changed too much on the tax policy, I think we can hold sway on that.
Okay. Oshada, one last question is 5G. I know I'm not comparing apples with apples, but India is struggling with this 5G auction. It became a flop. How differently would you do, given the fact that we are much more smaller?
Yeah, so Nista, it becomes a flop. Now, Thailand, it was a fantastic success, right? Maldives is a success. So it becomes a flop when governments try to make too much out of it, right? You need to understand on 5G, there's a significant rollover investment that the sector has to do after that. So you cannot continue to basically make it a complete way on top pricing. So it has to be a pragmatic approach. You need to look at the market dynamics as well. You need to understand the demographics and then make a call. So I think, I mean, if at ever we are going to look at a minimum bid, which is pragmatic, right? We need to strike a right balance on that, Nista. So the markets or countries that it has been a flop is because they made the wrong strategic decisions in setting the spectrum caps, for example. So there are certain nuances we need to do. Again, we started the consultancy and finishing it off with the ITU. So it's not going to be us doing it alone. I've just completed it after 1 year. So this was started last year. Today, we have 100 locations covered with 5G that was commenced, 5G trials that commenced in January 2020. So again, as a country, Nista, we need to be strategic. So 5G, for us, it's not about the consumer use case. It is about the technology enablement use case. So some countries have gone on the technology, the consumer use case, it becomes a flop, right? I mean, because it's still going to be 4G and the fiber. But when you look at the automation, the smart IoT enablement concept, if you take agri-tech to the smart cities and all of that, I think if you focus on the technological and industrial use case, that is where it's going to make a difference. So that's our focus.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Oshada. We'll get back to you. I'd like to move on to the two bankers in the panel. I know they've been waiting for some time. Both Sujeewa and Jonathan, maybe I'll post these questions in the interest of common questions in the interest of time. Is also a quick take on the heavy taxation on the banking sector. Are you also going to be very forgiving like Ashok and in terms of, yes, we will pay all that explanation? And also in terms of, I wanted to come with in terms of debt moratorium, there'll be pressure on the banks to extend it. There'll be lobby from various parties to extend it. So two questions. One is on the taxation, heavy taxation, and the other one is on the debt moratorium being extended. Sujeewa, maybe you can start. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. I have been waiting for, I think, close upon 2 hours.
Yeah, sorry about that.
That's intellectual discussion. Thank you very much. And thanks, Dinesh and the team for having me here. Yes, we are talking about this. There are 3 elements which really have some impact to banking industry. One is about this surcharge 25%. And surcharge 25% is, you need to understand if it is more than 2 billion, obviously, I think every bank make more than 2 billion. But the question here is, people are talking about the bankers are making large amount of profits, but not even 1% of the total, the capital employed. That I think we need to understand. Having said that, this 2 billion, and there's an issue about this, this is based on 2021 profits, which is also we need to understand that, because some of the bank or even corporates, there are about 67, it says, and these, the corporates have already declared dividends based on, their profits. And there's going to be a direct impact to our capital adequacy, ROE, ROI, and etc., etc. And also, I know some of the banks or the financial institutions, there had been, some kind of agreement or the understanding with the central bank about the capital augmentation program, and that augmentation program will have to be revisited. So another one is about VAT on financial services, because 15% to 18%. But this one also, we need to understand, and also the government expect banks to, or these institutions to pay monthly. So there's going to be some impact to finance, the cash flows. Another thing is this tax should not be shifted to customer. I think that's categorically mentioned. Although my friend Ashok says that, he is going to pass it on to customer. But in this case, I think there's going to be impact. But again, we need to understand that NIM, net interest margin, and because we need to have at least 3 to 4%, probably there could be a situation where we may adjust our NIM accordingly. So this is also important. And sustainability is absolutely important in our bottom lines, I think, because as you are aware, I think Jonathan also will probably agree that banking industry is going to pay about as much as about 60% of their, the total earnings as taxes, which is, I think, going to be fairly substantial. Another thing is about social security contribution, 2.5%. And this is going to be, again, there's going to be a cascading impact, Nista, based on this. And again, NIM is going to have some kind of impact, and need to see whether other income like dividends and other income also going to be, because we are waiting for, I think there could be a lot of deliberations and presentations, and we need to look at and see, because if you take dividend income, those are not active investments, those are passive investments that you are going to generate income. And debt service cover also will have some kind of impact from this. I think those are the things that I like to stress upon. That then also we need to look at the accounting entries for this, and how you are going to make those entries, which is very important. 20% taxable income, and 3%, the value contribution to financial services, and 2.5% on turnover, there's going to be a huge impact. Let me stop from that point, because my friend Jonathan also will have some kind of, points to be added there.
Yeah, thanks, Sujeewa. We'll get back to you. Jonathan?
Nista, I may have to leave about 6 o'clock now, already there, but anyway, let's see.
Okay, Jonathan, are you there? Okay, Jonathan. Sujeewa, a quick one in terms of, there is a lot of, everyone is saying to sort of, Sri Lanka needs to get its credit rating up. Any quick fix that you have that we can, because it has an impact on your borrowing also, if you do go abroad, if you do tap global sources, how can government, what would be a quick answer?
Nista, now, although Sri Lanka is having, let us say, CCC or whatever rating, but my bank, which I represent, has a AA- rating. Yeah. And we are talking about 2.5 trillion as at 30th September balance sheet. And I have already sent my GM and head of treasury to Gulf countries, and I they inform me that these lenders are extremely happy, and they have no major reservations about this, because we borrowed quite a lot of funds from those countries, and I can see things are the moving forward without any difficulties. So therefore, rating may not be a significant event. But having said that, sometime the interest rates because of the insurance and various other factors is going to be the major impact.
Okay, thanks, Sujeewa. I move on to Ganath, I know two more panelists have been waiting, so I will move on to Ganath, are you there?
Yes, yes, I'm here.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Two questions for you from the two sectors that you. One is obviously motor trade, which I think there are a lot of expectations on the budget. What do you feel in terms of no light at the end of the tunnel for you, and also the government shift towards or trying to promote more assembly lines here, how viable that is. Those are the two questions on the motor trade. And the other one is about your own diversification to agriculture, and how do you see prospects on the organic side?
Yeah, surely. About vehicles, in the current situation, even the previous panelists were talking about it. When there is a crisis situation in the country with so much of foreign exchange required for essentials, especially motor cars and SUVs, being a company, being a good, responsible corporate citizen, we don't mind the delaying of import of passenger cars and SUVs. But to develop a country, the commercial vehicles are very important. If the commercial vehicle does not come to a country, even the small and medium sector, take even a small farmer to bring his stuff from his farm to the main roads, they were using a small SUV, small commercial vehicle like a demo batta. So that is also not allowed to be imported. And then you go to extremes like construction, and tippers are also not allowed to be imported. It has to take special permission. So only vehicle at the moment allowed is a prime mover, which is not so much in demand at the moment. In the case of vehicle assembly, we have also started to, the process of trying to assemble. But again, this is not a big industry for Sri Lanka, I would say, because there's no related, connected, backward integrated suppliers for vehicle assembly businesses. See, even take big, in India, they have such big, so many plants. And it's economies of scale you can do in such a country. If you take Australia, they had like more than 6 or 7 manufacturers assembling, they have stopped everything. Because when you try to manufacture a little bit or assemble vehicles in small quantities, the cost is more. Even the vehicles which we are going to assemble, actually to bring the fully built of unit is cheaper than assembling it here. So these are my thoughts on this. And if you go to agriculture, this organic agriculture, even before this government ban, we were planning to do. We have already started in several areas to do it. See, I sometimes do not directly agree with the complete ban on inorganic, fertilizer. It should have been a hybrid. But we, as a company, we are on the move to do it, and we have started also doing it. And sometimes it's the biggest problem is like we try to just take compost. It's not only compost. We are trying to get it like even small pallet forms. We have already invested on some machinery, so we are in the process of doing it. But completely 100% organic will take a little time. Would have been ideally to go with the organic on a hybrid system. So that's about it on the questions you asked.
Okay, thank you. I will come back to you. Talal, I'll move on to you. Sorry for keeping you waiting for so long, like everyone else. Just a quick one. How do you see budget supporting entrepreneurs? There was some emphasis, I think, earlier also, one of the panelists did mention about there is sort of focus on improving livelihood. I'm talking about entrepreneurship, particularly startups, and how do you see that this budget facilitating that challenge?
Thank you, Nesta, and thanks for having me. Talking about how it helps, let me just get 2 points out. So one is in Sri Lanka, we have an extremely low rate of entrepreneurs, 3%, which is low compared to other countries like Bangladesh, it's 12%. And the other thing is with a lot of disruptive innovation happening, a lot of the private sector, which accounts for 80% of the GDP, which is a creation of entrepreneurs, could especially like in the coming decades could go off. So we need entrepreneurs who want to scale up to bring up companies to replace this. And going on to the budget, let me talk about, there are a number of positives as well. Removing the business registration fee for startups, that's a good move. And having a single window for importing, exporting could help. And establishment of the mini supermarket networks and investment zones for new products such as organic fertilizer, pharmaceutical production, and production of raw materials for the apparel industry. And also, lastly, also agro parks being built on uncultivated land. As we know that Sri Lanka, the government owns a very high percentage of land compared to the rest of the region. So there are a few shortfalls as well. Some things that I feel recommendations could have been done. Like, let's face it, it's a tough year for the government, so with such a big fiscal deficit. But on the policy side, some things could have been done. How I would say is like things I would like to have. For example, on the ease of doing business, we need to move a bit up because we are 99th in the world. And young businesses or startups or SMEs don't have the luxury of the larger companies. Like they have full-time lawyers, an HR department, accountants. So when you're starting, time is very valuable. So a one-stop place like how the BOI does for larger companies, that could be this thing. But as Sanjaya said, different businesses, industries require different things. But I'm talking about at the basic level, things that could be done. If you have one place for that, that'll be good. And also, when you look at the World Bank's ease of doing business, New Zealand tops the list. There are two interesting things. One is that, for example, in New Zealand, registering a company takes half a day. And also, most of the information is just very simple to find. So that's this thing. And one other thing I want to say is that we need to have a sort of a separate framework for registering, like forming or closing businesses for startups, because not many people talk about this. And even with my experience, the first company or even the second company an entrepreneur registers is not a success. And as we know, registering a company is very easy, and a shorter process. But closing down a company is a much longer process. So many people say that, they open a company for one investment from one country, but then it doesn't work out. And the next investor doesn't want to use that company. He wants a new company. So shutting down that company is a longer process. So that would kind of encourage more people to move in the formal direction. And as I mentioned in my last thing as well, we have a very shortfall of STEM graduates coming out, only 4,000 a year. So when you look at India, it's 2.6 million. So even per million, it comes up to around 8 times more. So we need to have more of those, because out of the 5,000 we produce, 1,000 leave the country. That's one thing. And also, lastly, one thing is that our economy is small. So, and as with only just $4,000 GDP per capita, as well as a 22 million population, we need to kind of position ourselves as a launching pad. So Vietnam has 26 FTAs, Sri Lanka only has around 3. So more FTAs would encourage investment to come, because when you compare to 2010 and right now, there's much more foreign investment coming in. So there's an opportunity in this area as well. And lastly, we need to encourage or work on companies to scale up. So currently I work with NASDAQ on advising and mentoring some Silicon Valley startups as well. One thing I noticed the difference is that there it's always about growth, always about scaling up. So they look at the market as the whole world. So these are a few things that I would have thought would have focused on. Yeah.
Thanks, Talal. Is Duminda around? Duminda? Okay, Duminda, thanks for staying on.
Yes.
Duminda, I know there have been a lot of discussions on tax proposals. There's a lot of difference about clarity. As a professional firm, have you got that clarity in terms of some of the key proposals? And my question is, the second question is, what do you think is the most challenging tax proposal that this government has come up with in the budget, in your view?
Yeah. So, thank you very much. So we have, I have already had discussions informally with the policymakers, and also from the Sri Lanka Chamber of Commerce, of which I represent as vice chair. We have decided to make a presentation on this proposed super gains tax. It is my personal view and that of the Sri Lanka Chamber also, that it has to be equitable across the board, and a taxation of 25% a selected category of corporates exceeding a certain amount not equitable and financially not justifiable. For example, I went through some of the companies that we handle. We have about 35 to 40 of them of them would be reliable, and some end up paying about 6 to 7 billion rupees per year, and the banking sector and the non-banking sector. So, these monies are not available in the companies now because you are paying in respect to the previous year. Two, dividends have been declared, investments have been made. So there's a difference between taxable income and cash flow. So our suggestion has been to make it equitable across the board, levy a surcharge of 10% on all, rather than selecting a few. But that discussion, I don't know the government will accept it. I have shown them that they are desired 100 billion they can collect still. Whether the government want to extend beyond that, I don't know. So that's something they have suggested. Also on the 2.5% tax, I mean, invariably it's a turnover tax, and what people say cascading, I mean, all that is a result of a tax. So that again, they are willing to accommodate probably the low margin businesses, especially the distributors and retailers, similar to NBT where there's a 1% charge. They might, but there are submissions come from different sectors, so I don't think they are in the mood to accept all submissions. That's the latest idea. It's 1 week from now. So there's time to, they are already started drafting it, unlike previous years. So that is all that here at the moment in terms of those two taxes.
Okay, thanks. Thank you very much, Duminda. There'll be a few more questions from Dinesh. Dinesh, over to you in terms of your set of questions.
Thank you, Nista.
Dinesh?
Thank you, Nista. Nista, can you hear me? Yeah. I picked up a few questions that came through the social media channel. Ashok, thank you for staying before I lose you. My question to you is, the question reads, Ashok, you are an astute businessman. Is the economy screwed up as Vijay highlighted? And what is our way out of the dollar crisis? I know you're good at answering this.
It's a very, very tricky question you have putting me on the, see, I mean, I think that, obviously the right answer is, we have to, let the dollar, make it free float, without controlling, right? So I think, but I know, you also know that, the repercussions. Obviously, government has dollar debt, those automatically will be, from a rupee term will be, will be much higher. But what is the solution? I can't see a solution. I don't want that to happen down the line. I think it may be better for us to, do it now than, waiting till that we get into further problems.
Okay. So are you advocating that we should go to the IMF?
See, I'm not an advisor of the government, so I can't answer that. But if we have to go to IMF, I suppose that we have to go to IMF, right? That's my answer.
Okay. One more question.
And we have to go now, right? Rather than waiting for another situation to get exaggerate. Become worse.
Yeah. Thank you. This one question on Sri Lankan Airlines. It says Sri Lankan Airlines is a huge burden on the taxpayer, including you as a big taxpayer. What is the way forward for Sri Lankan Airlines?
See, Dinesh, unfortunately, right, when we took over about 2 years back, right, we had a plan, right? Obviously, we were very confident that we would have turned it around, okay? But you must have, with the COVID, obviously, right, it's not only Sri Lankan Airlines, especially the, airlines, suffered a hell of a lot, and the hospitality industry. So, looking at the situation today, right, and if you really analyze Sri Lankan Airlines, I feel Sri Lankan Airlines is a very valuable asset. It's not only about the airline. We also have very highly profitable divisions like the ground handling, which makes about $75 million a year. And then we have catering, which makes about 5 billion, rupees per annum, right? So those also have got impacted because the airport is not really functioning. So the ground handling business has come down. Catering, obviously, it also has come down. But the fact is now we have given a proposal to the government. So we can, if the situation improves, so very easily we can, list some of these entities and we can raise money, right? So I feel that, without being a burden to the government, right, there are ways and means where Sri Lankan Airlines can raise their own money and survive. And also from a survival and, existence of the national carrier, I think it is important, given our economy, how much it dependent on the tourism, right? And if you look at, pre-COVID, we earn about $4.5 billion per annum on tourism. And out of that, probably 50% of the tourists have been brought to this country by Sri Lankan Airlines. So you can look at the indirect, contributions made by the national carrier. So I firmly believe it's, we must keep the national carrier going. Unfortunate it was because of COVID, we had to go through this. But I think that, by looking at everything in today's context where it is improving, now we are almost about 75% of pre-COVID in terms of turnover. And probably in December, we will hit closer to 90%. So I think making money is not the problem. I think that down the line, we will be profitable, right? Probably. I wish it will be soon. But the fact is, right, we also have liabilities, which is about $1 billion. So I think one way, we have to find a way to, overcome those and, structure these and, take this airline forward. So that's the plan.
Okay, thank you. Duminda, are you still around?
Yes, Dinesh.
Yeah, Duminda, somebody wants to know, now everybody is criticizing this the super tax and the social security levy. Is there any alternative the government has that you can propose as a professional body? And I know you are a veteran in the tax industry.
Yeah, so that's why, as I told Dinesh in the earlier discussion also, that for the super gains tax, our alternative, my alternative to the government has been, don't levy 25% on a selected people of, say, 100 companies at 100 billion. Levy it across the board, because everyone, for example, the government spent a lot of money on the COVID vaccination. So I think everyone accepts that they had done a lot of work, 80-90 billion rupees they spent. So I think the cost of that should be borne by everyone, right? So not one person. So we had a situation where tax is paid by a few. So if you put it across the board, I don't think any people will complain either. Then the pain will be less than having to pay for a selected few people. Where 25% is a significant amount, right? You will jump for example, the banking sector will take the tax to almost 70%. And you were a former chairman of 2 banks, 70% is a rate, it will take up to 25%. So I think it is across the board, a 10% or 5% across the board to everyone is fair and equitable. And they can get the same revenues, in my view, if they go for a tax of that nature rather than go for a super gains tax. But as for the social security contribution, Dinesh, I don't think there's no alternative, because the VAT rate was generously reduced to 8% when they have it to 8%. No one asked for it. On top of that, they abolished NBT, which was about 2% and being revenue substantially more than VAT as a percentage. They abolished economic service charge. So with all those things, in my view, they had no choice but to bring back what it was before. So cascading effects, all those will be there. In the end, consumer, as Ashok said, the consumer pays. So whatever tax you put the consumer in the end pays in some form or the other. So I don't think there is an alternative to other than an indirect tax of that nature, because otherwise you can't get that kind of revenue they lost. VAT revenue was about 200 billion. NBT was about 100 billion. ESC was about 50 billion. So to get to that revenue, I don't think they can do anything without getting the tax of that nature across the board to all sectors of society.
Okay. Thank you, Duminda. I should be asking this question from the bankers. I think both of them are not signed off. This Duminda, somebody says that the banking sector has been making huge book profit because of the moratoriums. And should the accounting rules be changed?
Yeah, I think the accounting rules are based on international accounting standards. So if Sri Lanka changes the Sri Lanka financial reporting standards, then the Sri Lankan banks cannot be rated equally with foreign banks. So when you adopt sort of reporting accounting standards, Sri Lanka is on par with international accounting standards. So if you change the rules, then those banks can't be compared to the rest of the world. So that's the issue. So the accounting standards are catered to the business situation. So they can't be altered. The moment they alter, then the way that all the reporting, everything will get affected and it will not be consistent with the rest of the world. That's the issue.
Okay. So before I move on to Harini, Ashok, one more quick question. You're a big shareholder of NDB. And also you're invested big in the tourism sector. How do we really get out of this moratorium issue? Because I know the tourism sector will find it very difficult to repay back these loans in the next 5 years.
I think moratorium is, you cannot continue with moratorium, right? There's no question about that. As the governor said, at some point that we need to stop. And I think these banks obviously will have to relook at, look at the cash flows and restructure most of these loans. That's the way forward. And tourism also gradually picking up. So I think that they will have to start paying something. So it's banks will have to look at the, affordability and the cash flows and, find the different ways you have to customize solutions for each of the customer. There's no one solution for everybody.
Okay, thank you. Harini, these are not my questions. These are two questions from the audience. The first question says, why does the JVP spend so much time criticizing without offering solutions? I don't know if I have to ask it, but then it is from other channels.
No, we have been offering solutions. I think we've been talking about solutions for a long time. Maybe we've not been heard. But when we were campaigning, not as the JVP, but as the NPP, of which the JVP is a part, we developed policies in 10 different sectors, including for the economy, and we've been talking about that, and we've been raising that consistently for the last 2 years. And we are currently in the process of revising those policies, because obviously the conditions have changed now. And we will be very soon taking those to the public again. So no, we are not only criticizing, we have been offering solutions, and the solutions that we are offering in the current new circumstances, you will get to hear about very soon also.
Okay, the other question is also to you, but the budget hardly provided any incentives for skills development and education. What is the JVP's view?
For us, we think that human resource development is one of the most important sectors, right? If you take our economy or our sort of specific context, we don't have so many natural resources. We don't have lots of other things that we can exploit, right? So building human capacity and focusing on that is critical. So for us, that would be a huge priority. Right, that would be a huge priority. People have already spoken about the potential in the IT sector, and I think we need to capture a significant market share of that. It's way below what we should be doing, right? So in order to do that, then there has to be a real investment in education, and we think that has to be a priority for the government. There's no way out of it, and that's our position. That's what we are saying. Unfortunately, in this budget, there has been a slight 1% increase in the allocation to education, but still, if you look at it over the years, we have never gone above 1%, except I think in 2016 of the GDP in our allocations for education, and in no way is that enough if we are going to use that as a potential for really building on one of our key resources, our human resources.
Yeah, someone says that we are losing 1% of our GDP to corruption. What is the JVP solution to this?
Yeah, well, I would imagine it's a little bit more than 1% actually. No, I think that's a huge concern, and that would clearly be one of our most important. Again, I think you need to also, make a minor correction here that I'm not speaking on behalf of the JVP. I'm speaking on behalf of the NPP. We are a coalition, right? And one of the key interventions would be our anti-corruption drive. I mean, I think that's something we will promise and that we can deliver on, because there's no way that we can get ourselves out of this mess without really tackling the issue of corruption and tackling also the issue of overcompensated, overprivileged political class, which then, is transferring that burden to the private sector, to the public sector, and as well as the people. So I think this is a huge collective effort, right? Where we don't sort of see ourselves as, private sector versus public sector, and it's a collective effort that we really need to have. And to do that, the political leadership needs to inspire confidence. And for that, we really have to root out corruption. There's no way that we can get out of this mess without that.
Yeah, thank you. Kasthuri, are you still there?
I am Dinesh. I'm just.
Yeah, hi, Kasthuri. Kasthuri, I think you can respond to this question. It says there are more iPhones 13 than cancer medicines in the market. Why are banks playing hide and seek with LC opening? Another bank are there, maybe you should respond to that.
So I must say, yeah, the fact remains there is more, in the formal channels, there is more iPhones than cancer. In the informal channels, there are cancer medicines. It's coming through the gray market, but it's nothing, this time around, I must say, the banks are still, even though it's a bit tough for them, they are honoring from the industry perspective with some delays on the LCs. The shortages actually have come through I think this is my opinion, is that when we went through price controls, we did it inward looking. We're a small market. Out of a 20 million, it's only 10 million which use the private sector. Others use a state. And then while we did price control, I'm all for having a sensible, fair pricing. We had to look at it in the last 3 years in context of the external market. What is happening out there? Have the cost of medicines gone up? How are the demands for these medicines out there? So they have not looked at it. So Sri Lanka has become irrelevant for the oncology because they price control the tender market. So now cancer is a small component for private market. When they control on tender market, it becomes irrelevant for Sri Lanka, and most of it officially move out. So you have the best, world's largest, Roche doesn't really supply mostly to Sri Lanka unless it's needed. And the rest, and there is a big gray market. It's a big concern. Gray market means, again, it's not controlled and people pay actually way higher than what they should pay if it was in a formal market. Second thing is the supply chain itself or any adverse reaction, there's no accountability. So this time along, it's not the bank. I think it has been there for some time from a systematic break on people not understanding the global supply chain, how Sri Lanka fits in it. And when you do price control, and a pricing mechanism should be there for these adjustments. So Sri Lanka doesn't have a mechanism still. And that's the problem we see in all essentials at the moment here.
Before I move to Oshada and Gahanath, maybe one more quick question to you, Kasthuri. On the pharma manufacturing side, I know the government is putting a lot of effort. Was there sufficient incentives in the budget to support the growth of the pharma industry?
So I must say, hats off to BOI. For now, they have brought in a plan, right? And they've brought in incentives. But all this will work as proof when the existing manufacturers who have put in new plants can operate. So I know there are a few people who have put in investments. We put in the largest investment for the OSD plant. There we lack consistency. And remember, Sri Lanka is not a science-driven country. Sri Lanka doesn't have the economies of scale or the scale to make it work. So you need a buyback at least for the first 2-3 years, and then to work on the private and export market. So and a pharmaceutical cannot be exported from day one. It has to go through 2-3 years of local market before it qualifies for export. So in that context, we are experiencing inconsistency in terms of honoring the buyback. Because what I feel the state, or there has to be a strategy of how the local players work and what molecules has to be shared. So technically, if you have 5 molecules and if there are and the existing number of players, how do they get equitably shared? And if you have a new set of 3 players coming, what is a new set of molecules coming in? That's not been looked at. It's just they're taking the existing pool and dividing amongst the same or increased players. So there is a huge impact, and that doesn't make commercial sense for investment. So if those things are not clear, they don't have a clear strategy of how do you attract and what do you start manufacturing as a country and who does what. You're not going to, and unfortunately, BOI has done a good plan and to anchor investment in the absence, like the BCG gentleman said, and you need to have the 4 Cs. It's not easy to get all 4 Cs at the same time, but the clarity and the consistency in this context for the existing businesses is important. And I think it's important because Sri Lanka can move, because you see the East and the West and the disruption in the supply chain, and pharma is a critical part of it. We can use it and leverage and get global companies to actually use Sri Lanka as a destination for regional exports, because they would use their plants for more lucrative markets and we could be used for that. So I guess that's needed, and I don't see that happening.
Thank you. Oshada, thank you for staying on. Oshada, there's a huge potential for creating Sri Lanka as a logistics hub. Do we have the bandwidth to support it, like in countries like Singapore and India?
Yeah, I think so. You're talking from a technology logistics perspective, right, Dinesh? Just to be clear.
Yes. Yeah.
No, absolutely. So when you look at technology logistics, Dinesh, I think I'll give an example. I mean, the data center enablement and all of that plays a pivotal role. I think Sri Lanka boasts a very strong submarine cable ecosystem. I mean, we have 7, in fact 8 as we speak today. The CMV5 submarine cable has a 25 terabits per second capacity. We've already invested on the CMV6 through SLT and a consortium with other countries. So it's going to add up another 60 BPS. I think we have capacity, but there are other pertinent issues we have to sort out, Dinesh. One is the cost of electricity over here, right? The cost of electricity is exponentially higher than other destinations that they would typically set up this sort of data and other technological logistics. So that's a challenge, Dinesh. That's an absolute challenge. And when you go into that tier 4 sort of perspective now, even in Sri Lanka today, it's all T3 data centers. The epitome of it is T4, where you need to have a second grid line, for example, in terms of power. So I think these are challenges, but I think we are well poised in terms of the bandwidth. I think we are absolutely confident. I think the other subsidiary rings are coming in through fiberization. We are already in chat with having backup satellite-based connectivity coming into Sri Lanka as well. As I speak, already Amazon was in Sri Lanka a couple of months back. There are very interesting perspectives that we're discussing on. So to answer your question, yes, we have bandwidth. But of course, we have to look at it holistically. It's not just the bandwidth. We need to look at other imperatives, as I mentioned, such as the power and other infrastructure.
Yeah. Another quick question. Are you doing sufficient work to promote Sri Lanka as a technology hub?
No, absolutely. So Dinesh, over the years, again, I'm not just going for a couple of years back or whatever. On a longer term, I think the approach we've taken is quite siloed. I think, again, we need a whole of government approach. ICTA goes on an aspect, export development goes, does its own initiatives. And I think it's been quite siloed the way we position our country. So I believe today, as we speak, what we need to embrace and what we are doing is today is a more whole of government approach. So again, as I mentioned, Dinesh, by 2024, we are looking at an ambitious $3 billion mark. Now, to achieve that, again, today, we have only about 400 tech companies. By 2022, we'll have to move it up to 550 tech companies and 700 by 2024. As I mentioned, the startup ecosystem, we need to have 400. We have 400 around today, but by 2022, we need to scale it up to 600, and by 2024, 1,000, right? But I think we have to take a different approach now. I mean, see, the travel and the whole perception of positioning in terms of marketing, the trade shows and the road shows have stopped, Dinesh. But again, today, what we're doing is we've taken a very different approach. For example, enabling and engaging with our foreign mission ecosystem, for example. We believe they have a very important role to play in terms of positioning. But of course, what we're doing is we are engaging with this the foreign missions of critical markets that we are looking at, and we are seeking their support to basically do the pre-sales, do the initial positioning. We are changing the perception of us traveling to traditional roadshows to bringing them down, getting a flavor for Sri Lanka. And again, the digital nomad program, Dinesh, that we're talking about today is very important. I think the digital nomad program is quite important for us. As you would know, Club Med has positioned us as the second best digital nomad destination for year 2021. So I think it's important that we have a strategic approach. We are doing it right now, and I believe out of any negative scenario, there's positives. And I believe the fact that the MNCs are moving into a more differentiated workforce enablement approach, I think Sri Lanka has an advantage here we can leverage on. And again, I think we have to get global indices to recognize us. For example, we've been recognized as a global delivery destination of the year by GSA, the Global Outsourcing Association, for the year 2019. A.T. Kearney has put us on the first globally for financial effectiveness, in fact. So I think it's important that we continue. Just last Friday, Dinesh, we've worked with JLL. We put out the country report as well that looks at the parameters of the real estate for technology, right? Again, when we look at as a destination, I mean, the traditional aspect of them coming in and investing to brick and mortar, that's gone out of the window, right? I mean, so we need to have ready to go space. Today, we are building 5 technoparks. We've already commenced construction. We are talking about, these are not typical Trace City sort of concepts. These are complete ecosystems. So in Galle, it's a 20-acre property that we're building up. Kurunagala is the second. Third is Diganakandi. Fourth is coming in Kurunagala. And in fact, again, I was just traveling back today. We were going to Wijewardena as well to look at setting it up here. So what will happen is we're trying to fuse in what the destination has to offer as well as the technology capabilities, Dinesh. So we believe that's going to be the value proposition that's going to set us apart from the typical other competition from other destinations. So the technoparks, today we have 3 million square feet in terms of current grade A space for technology services, but we believe these technoparks will add another 1.2 million square feet of space. So I think we have to look at, again, to answer your question, all these will enable us to be positioned compared to the other countries. I mean, the likes of Bangladesh, Vietnam, and Cambodia are coming up and giving us a good run for our money in terms of the traditional way. So I think we have to change from a cost arbitrage position into a value arbitrage, and that's what we're doing now.
Thank you. Thank you. Good luck. I hope you can monetize some of these things because the country badly needs dollars.
Absolutely. I think that's a huge responsibility on the ICT sector, and we are quite confident, Dinesh.
Yeah. Thank you. My final question is to Ashok and Dr. Ramaswamy. But before that, Ghana, there's a question for you here. Somebody wants to know: do we really need to import vehicles? Can we have a 2-year freeze and focus on manufacturing of vehicles? And thanks for waiting so long.
Yeah, Dinesh, I earlier also answered it. Manufacturing vehicles in Sri Lanka is a no-go. I mean, with economies of scale for this kind of population, nobody should be manufacturing or assembling any vehicle in Sri Lanka. So that's my opinion, because we cannot export. Nobody will buy a made in Sri Lanka vehicle. So what's the point in, I think at the moment, because of the current country situation, as I told you, responsible corporate citizen, we should be letting essentials to come into the country. That is, passenger cars and SUVs could wait, because you can see it's a lot of them still on the road. But let us have the spare parts to come into so that we can maintain these. But commercial vehicles should come in. So that's my answer.
Thank you. The final question is to Ashok and Dr. Ramaswamy. Somebody wants to know, in terms of expectations from the government, what are your thoughts? Can Ashok go first?
Expectations mean what?
In terms of facilitating the private sector, given the challenges we are facing.
Yeah, so, Dinesh, I think the government is faced with all these issues because of the COVID, right? And we also must commend the government, in terms of the vaccination process and all that. So it has created a safer environment for all of us to function. I think that's the number one, right? Beyond that, obviously that we would like to see there's, some facilitation for the private sector to, obviously they must understand the private sector is the engine of the growth, right? That's what everybody says, but I don't know whether they really, practice that. So that they need to, understand and practice that and recognize the private sector as the engine of the growth. So that is number one. So I think if that happens, I think that obviously, right, we have to, right, if we are talking today about 3.5% growth, right? We are coming from such a low base. I think we should be doing around 8 to 9% growth to come anywhere. So I think we can do that as long as that the environment is being created for private sector to do business in a free manner. Now, today's context, right, we can't open LCs, we can't, there's so much of restrictions. So, it's a very difficult environment. So that's what I said, there are key issues that we need to sort out first, right? Stabilizing the, dollar to rupee, rate. I think that is the number one, which I see. So if we can get that sorted, that is why I said, the appointment of the central bank governor was the main thing for me, more than the budget, because budget will change along the way, right? What we see on paper today may not be the thing that what we see, in about 3 months' time, right? So I think, so those key things has to be there. So, so the real word is, consistency, and we need to obviously build confidence among our investors and everyone, if we need to do business.
Thank you. Ghana, a quick comment from you before I ask Dr. Ramaswamy to close the session. Quick comment on your expectations from the government, other than importing our vehicles.
Not really, but there was some issues like in the proposals, they was talking about having a fee for cars which meet with an accident. I don't know how, I mean, accident is accident. You can't charge a fee on these kind of things. And also they're trying to, like, illegal motor vehicles to give amnesty. If it is illegal, why should somebody give amnesty? That is, these are illegal because they have done something wrong. They have like imported two pieces and joined together, which is a serious safety thing, you know. And the other thing is releasing vehicles which are seized in the custom. Why should you release seized vehicle? It should be auctioned and money should come to the government. So these are a few points on the budget area.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ansami, Dr. Ansami, you can close it. Dr. Ansami, can you hear us? You're muted.
My apologies.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's heartening to see that several people stayed on despite other commitments. I think to answer also the question you just posed to Ashok and use that as a framework to close this session, I came from and I need to be careful here so that I'm not insensitive to people who manage companies and who have thousands of livelihoods under their protection. I purposely selected to speak at a more macro level because I anticipated that a lot of the focus, and rightly so at this point, will be on the current crisis. I come from the perspective that yes, we have a very difficult crisis and a very difficult situation to manage. But if we take a step back and look at a global perspective and examples, there have been many examples of even worse situations. Look at Latin America, East Asia, Greece, Russia, and other locations where countries were in much worse situations and they came out of it. And I'm confident that Sri Lanka will come out of this as we have in the past. The real question to me is, how bad will it get before we turn the corner? And along the road, what will be the collateral damage? Now, from an immediate, having said that, I believe that we cannot only focus on the crisis and not think about or plan on the medium to long term. I think both of those can go together. I think that's a very important point to make. In terms of what we can expect right now from the government, I think one is a responsible and long-term oriented solution to the crisis. A thought-out solution. The private sector or other agencies cannot get involved in this. It's up to the government to make these policy decisions. There's no choice. And that's the main thing I think we can expect from the government immediately. Followed by a few steps, one being helping industries to recover from the devastation of the COVID situation. Again, that's easier said than done, given the debt crunch we are in, but that should be another priority. And from there onwards, focus on the medium to long term with the right set of policies, consistency, and focus on resetting the economy, as it were. So I hope, I'm hopeful that we will make the right choices one step at a time, beginning with solving our foreign currency crisis.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you to the panel, and over to Talal to just do a quick summary and close the session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dinesh. I'll just do a very quick summary as it's been a long session. And just to summarize, there were a lot of positive, confident message from the governor. And at the same time, Mr. Wijewardena also called it a sick economy. So that's still a debate going on. And, I see a lot of areas that were mentioned by Mr. Ramaswamy about digitization and the benefits of having KPIs for the state sector, as well as tourism being a key area for growth. But one of the criticisms is that the elephant in the room, or the elephants in the room, were not addressed. That is the foreign currency situation and the debt crisis. But moving on, my take would be, as I mentioned before, there are a few ways other countries or major economies have decided to go forward. One is China digitization, or the US more into infrastructure development, and the EU in a greener economy. So I think we need a bit of all three. And one area we need is innovation. So as far as like, for example, just finishing off, Switzerland ranks #1 in the Global Innovation Index. And one of the reasons is because the government does not interfere with the private sector. And at the same time, universities, the corporate sector, and startups work together. So this is something that I'm currently doing with Mohottala, where we are trying to bring in the corporate sector, and we have an incubator there. So this is something that hopefully will produce results. And lastly, I want to say one of the biggest shortfalls of the budget, in my view, would be 1% of GDP spent on education. This is very low compared to the region, because if we are going to become a prosperous nation with a powerful, strong economic recovery, we need to focus on education. So with that, I'll